Welcome to ResearchLand. ResearchLand is a project that makes academics work on important issues publicly accessible and available, especially to practitioners and general public. My name is Zeynep Ercan. I'm a professor of early childhood education at Rowan University, New Jersey. And today I have a wonderful guest, my dear colleague, Dr. Meir Muller. He's an assistant professor at University of South Carolina, and he's joining us to particularly talk about his work in anti-racist education in early childhood, but specifically a very recent book chapter he published actually this year, 2021, is fresh out of press, and his chapter's name is Preparing Black Children to Identify and Confront Racism in Books, Media, and Other Texts, Critical Questions. So, Meir, I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. It is an absolute honor to be here, and I'm so excited to share some of the work I've recently been doing with your group. So I'm going to get started by sharing my screen. And just a little about myself. I am both the head of the Cutler Jewish Day School, which is a small school in Columbia, South Carolina, and a university professor in the College of Education, particularly in the early childhood department. So I want to show you a little bit of the anti-racist work I do in both places, and then I'll dive right into the chapter. So here we can see, bulletin boards that are hanging in our preschool right now. So the Cutler Jewish Day School has about 160 children. Majority of the children are Jewish, but not all of them. And there are about 20% of the children are African American. And you can see by their work, these are the preschoolers. So these are 3- and 4-year-olds, even 2-year-olds and younger, studying about Black excellence, Black culture, because our school is pro-Black. We try to counter anti-Blackness in our world. So you could see here on one bulletin board, Black excellence is being studied by, I believe, 3-year-olds. And then on the other, it was a comparative study where 4-year-olds were looking at Dr. Martin Luther King, along with a Rabbi Heschel, who marched with him and worked with him, so the students were able to combine some of their Jewish studies with their anti-racist activities. And here you could see an elementary school. The children read the book, Daddy, There's a Noise Outside, which is a story of a family and the children here protesting, and asked their parents what that's about. And then the children read the story, and here, I believe it was first grade, the teacher asked them to illustrate what the story meant to them. So you could see in this child's authentic writing that they described what a protest is. They used the terms Black Lives Matter, and they asked their parents in this cartoon that they drew if they can go out and protest. So the children are getting the lesson that not only are they scholars as 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, but they are also activists. So that is some of the anti-racist examples we could see in the day school. And then, as I wear my other hat at the university, I am blessed to work with a great group of faculty. We're known as the Anti-Racist Collective, and we run a program called the Urban Cohort. And these are juniors and seniors who dedicate the last 2 years of their studies to focus on anti-racism in every class. And you could see some of their projects where they were practicum or student interns. This even includes 1 or 2 who are now in the classrooms, and some of the works they did with classroom teachers. So those are just some of the titles and some of the work they do. At the university, along with the regular coursework, we have a student organization called REACH, which is Race, Equity, and Advocacy in Early Childhood. And this REACH group is just completely optional. It meets about every 3 weeks in the evening, and students, these pictures are prior to COVID, now we're doing everything over Zoom, but the students would come together and we talk about topics we can't get to in the classroom, whether that's going home for Thanksgiving. How do we talk about racism with our families? What is a microaggression? What's a macroaggression? Should we just be saying aggressions? Any popular culture issues that come up, how do we deal with those? And you could see here in these photographs, we also have been blessed to take the students, to conferences to present. So they went to the NCTE, the National Council of Teachers of English. They went to the Association of Constructivist Teaching Conference, and they presented their work there. So I am blessed to be immersed in anti-racist work, both at the day school and at the university. And today, I'm going to briefly talk about this book. As was said, is just off the presses, literally just became available in March 2021, and it's called We Be Lovin' Black Children. And my contribution was this fourth chapter in the book, and how to help prepare Black children to identify, confront racism in books, media, and other critical texts. So I first want to say what the great scholar Ibram X. Kendi said, that when we talk about racism and anti-racism, that is not in the exclusion of having to confront injustice for every other group. We need to counter anti-Muslim talk. We need to be pro-LGBTQ plus people. We need to counter anti-Semitism. We are not just focused on one group. We recognize the importance of the other groups. However, we also recognize that, as Dumas and Ross showed in their work, that anti-Black racism is the most dominant form of racism in the United States. So I unapologetically am focused on anti-Blackness, and this chapter was written about that, but I would invite anyone to use these questions I'm about to share to counter prejudice or oppression of any group of people. So let's dive in and look at some of these questions. Well, let's say one of the things I often get is people say, wait, you're doing this work with very young children in early childhood, but children don't know about racism. They're so innocent. So I wanted to spend just a moment to let you know that the research clearly shows us that young children are thinking and acting on issues of race. So we see here in this chart that children as young as 2 begin to reason and attribute people's behaviors to the color of their skin. By 30 months, children are playing with people that have a similar skin tone as they do. And then in kindergarten, children are already attributing one race as better than another. So friends, by kindergarten, children are already showing signs of, I hate to say it, but I'm going to use a harsh word, white supremacy. However, the good news is we can counter all of this. The studies show that after even a week or 2 of conversation with children, we can confront these issues. So that is the amazing thing. And I'm hoping that you find these critical questions that I'm going to offer you as a tool today can begin or help with those conversations. So this is work I had the privilege of doing with my college students, the urban cohort, over 2 years. So this was a couple of different cohorts of students where we looked for questions that children can use to challenge texts they read. And here you could see some of those questions. Are Black people included in this text? So picture yourself reading a storybook with a child, or looking at an advertisement, or a meme, or a cartoon, a website, and you're asking these questions. Are Black people included in the text? Do you see anything that is unfair to Black people? Who or what is shown as important? Can this message be hurtful to Black people? How does the text make you feel? And so important, what can you do to improve this issue? So once again, you can change this set of questions to address any issue. If we have a community where Asian people are being discriminated against, we can use these questions. Where any group, we could change it. But I've written it to help us with anti-Blackness, as once again, it is the most prominent form of racism in our country. So think about these questions as a tool to use with students. And I like to try it with you, so I can provide a couple of examples that you might look at. And I believe this PowerPoint will be made available to you so you could use these with children in your lives. And I've always found it important to recognize that we have to polish our own critical lens. We have to get in habit of using these critical questions so that we could help children do the same. So let's look at a couple that would be for adults and a couple for children. So here is an advertisement from a large educational company, one that we're familiar with, saying, hey, come to our conference and learn from our experts. So now thinking of the critical questions, and if you didn't take a screenshot of them, I'll just put them in a nutshell. Whose voice is heard? Whose voice is silenced? Is this fair to Black people? Is it not? And when we look at this, learning from our experts, and think of those questions, we might quickly come to the conclusion that this is not fair, that there is not, seemingly not a single person of color is in this flyer, which would mean that perhaps the young African-American teacher does not recognize that they would be considered an expert. Our colleagues of color at the university do not see themselves represented. So using, and if you think of when you're flipping through this magazine, it would be easy just to flip through this page and say, oh yeah, I heard about that conference. But once we start using our critical questions to see the world, we recognize the injustice here and the potential damage it can do to a new teacher or even someone who's in the field, because they are not represented. Another example that we might use with children in the world of advertising. This was a famous advertisement for Gap children that was introduced in media. So it was a television advertisement I think it was introduced on the Ellen DeGeneres program. And here, the line over this was female empowerment. And yet, when we use our critical lens and look at this, we see that the only African-American child is literally being used as a prop. The taller white girl is leaning her hand on the African-American child's head. And this is in an advertisement, female empowerment, where each one of these is a recognized gymnast. They're the best at their certain age group and level, and yet this is how the picture was framed. And I want to point out here that this was not just one person making this decision. This is Gap Clothing. This is an international company that has a PR department and an advertising department and a marketing department and a photography department. And all of these people thought this was okay. Similarly, you could see in this first box here, a Dove body wash advertisement where the model has dark skin, wearing a dark shirt, and she then takes it off, and it's, Dove makes you whiter, makes you cleaner. So it's that old racial trope that dark skin is somehow dirty. And yet, this was not caught by a multi-million-dollar company. And I won't go through these video clips with you because we only have a few moments left. But we have here an international commercial where a person, the woman calls over this gentleman who's painting her home, and she's right outside of a clothes washer and pushes him inside and throws in the detergent. The commercial is for the detergent. And then a few seconds later, he pops up and he has Asian features, so much lighter skin. And once again, it says, look how clean. And the woman is obviously more attracted to the gentleman that comes out of the washing machine. And Heineken beer, same problem. Sometimes lighter is better. They slide a bottle of beer past three darker skinned people. It ends up at a lighter skinned person. And then the line, sometimes lighter is better, comes on. And I understand that people will say, well, that's not what they meant. But use our critical questions. Who might this hurt? Is this unfair? And children can recognize this. You could do this with young children. And this appears, these were examples in advertising, but we also see a famous example from a geography textbook of 10th graders in Texas, where patterns of immigration was the title used to describe the Atlantic slave trade. And you see it says they brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States. But we all know they didn't bring millions of workers. They enslaved people. And it wasn't a pattern of immigration. It was a pattern of enslavement. Yet these texts could be missed. And this company did recall the book. But after 100,000 copies were sent to schools throughout the state of Texas. If they would have used the critical questions, they would have recognized that this was misinformation that could harm children's self-esteem, their understanding. Whether the child is African American or white, this has dangerous messages. And as we get down to our last 3 minutes of my brief presentation, just some other examples. So we see it in textbooks, and you could study these as you'll see the slides on your own. Children's classics, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where the Oompa Loompas are described as all coming from the same village in Africa, put in crates, shipped over to the United States, and they write, and paid in chocolate. So they literally describe enslaved people, but for many years it wasn't considered a problem. In today's versions, it's made better, but here we have the originals. We see it in Mary Poppins and in other texts, and we see it in current read-alouds. We don't have the time to go through all of these, but Birthday Cake for George Washington was actually recalled as it pictured enslaved people very happy. They were just so happy to be enslaved. And each one of these books, in my mind, seems to have a problem that the critical questions could unfold. Here I use this with a bit older children, first, second, third graders, where we compare two books. The House That George Built, which just describes George Washington as solely of being in charge of building the White House, and we don't see enslaved labor anywhere, to Brick by Brick, where we do see that work. And you could see some of the things I asked the students to do. But Brick by Brick shows the true story of who built it. And here you see one of the pages of the Birthday Cake for George Washington, and you could see how happy the enslaved people look. And nowhere in the text does it mention that they're enslaved. A Fine Dessert, unfortunately, also has a page where an enslaved worker seems to be happy with her lot in life. Another book, Chocolate Me. So I'm just giving you examples of these critical questions and how you could make children aware as they read these stories. But perhaps the one I find really disturbing is this one, and I'll end with this vision, But here you have a box of a sugary breakfast cereal, Corn Pops, when this is a game that was printed on the back of that box. And it was like a find game. So, can you find a sugar pop on a skateboard? Can you find one swimming? Look at all the fun the sugar pops are having. How much fun can you name? But look at it, friends. Use your critical questions, and it won't take you long to find that the only darker skinned sugar pop is the maintenance person. And of course, there is nothing wrong with being a person who cleans, right? In COVID times, these are the people keeping us health, and in other times, it's a fine profession. But when you have a game that shows all the white people, so to say, having fun, and the one black, darker skinned person serving those white people, it is problematic. And our critical questions can lead us to uncovering these types of examples and helping children to detect, study, and confront issues of racism and do something about it. So I'm going to stop the share now.
Meir, this was a fantastically provocative set of images. And as I was reading through your chapter, I almost felt like I wish Meir shows us those images because I really, really want to see them. Thank you so much for that introduction. That was wonderful. And I think in that short amount of time, you taught us really how to look at everything critically. So I have a set of questions for us for our conversational time now, but I wanted to remind our viewers that we are having a talk with Dr. Meir Muller, assistant professor in University of South Carolina, talking to us about how to capture racist messaging in children's literature and images and media, and how to encounter those with critical questions, especially with Black children, but also within general public. And he also explained that those are the critical questions that you could use to focus on any populations who were marginalized in a sense. So those are really important conversations. I wanted to go back to this one image, and if you can give us another example of how you would walk children through the imaging. I wanted to go back to the Doe body wash example that you posted there. There was a Black woman taking off a shirt and becoming a white woman all of a sudden. Let's have a scenario of how you would address this with young children. Let's say you're showing them this picture. What would you say? What would you ask in that particular example? Because that was so important and so telling.
Thank you. Thank you. What a great question. So I'd probably start by saying, children. So I'm envisioning now 4 and 5-year-olds we're sitting in circle time, and I maybe have laminated that picture and I'm showing them and saying, children, tell me, what do you see in this picture? And I let them respond, understanding, hearing what they're constructing, what they're understanding. And let's say they do not recognize that it's problematic. So I might say, okay, so children, I hear what you're describing. There's a person, and she was wearing a dark sweater, and then she pulled it over her head, and maybe, children, you thought it was a magic trick, and she became a white person. Or maybe you're wondering what it is about. Is it a different person? So I'd say here, in this advertisement, it is for a soap that cleans us. What do you think they're saying? So I would start by asking questions, trying to get the children. But let's say I was unsuccessful, that the questions they did not see the problematic nature of this. So I might say, well, children, let me ask you, let's look at your skin and think that someone is saying that your skin is what you have, but we want you in this picture. We are going to show you who you are right now. We're going to take a picture of you, and then we're going to ask you to pull a sweater over you, and we're going to change you. Does that feel that they're saying that the way you look right now is wonderful, and they want to celebrate it? or are they looking to change you? So I would prompt the children, and I've found, so I've done this with second and third graders, and they were immediately found it problematic. So the older children, the 7 and 8 year olds, found it problematic. And we talked about it. And we talked about, I'll tell you, with a group of third graders, I even went deeper. I'm going to share something that the model, the black model in this advertisement actually defended it. So with one class, I did speak about that. And the children, we spoke about how sometimes we don't even recognize when something's wrong. And that was a much deeper talk. But in general, what I like to do with the children is to just recognize that this is telling us that the way we are is not good enough. And I read a book called Good Enough, or sorry, it's right behind me. I Am Enough is one example. I have many affirmative texts that are read alouds that show how who we are and the color of our skin and the texture of our hair is wonderful. So I try to always have one of those books on hand to counter these type of advertisements. And I always end by asking children, what should we do? What can we do about this? Did that answer the question?
This is amazing because we really want this to be a model for all of us, right? Like teacher educators, researchers, teachers, parents, and anyone who is really interested in this kind of critical work. Meir, I really liked the one picture that you showed in your slides, which was an international example. I really did want to talk about that aspect. So in the current global context, especially post-COVID, like we see that everything that everyone does around the world becomes available to us, right? Like, so there is no hiding in bigotry or ignorance, pretending that a person can stay in their nationalistic cultures and badmouth other communities or provide racist content about other communities, even within the boundaries of your country. It's not possible anymore because everything will be on internet. So what will this bring to us in terms of global consciousness in anti-racist work? What do you see in the future?
Thank you for that question. So I think we need, as teacher educators and educators, to recognize that this is, in fact, a worldwide problem. So my understanding is the top beauty product in the country of India is a skin lightening cream. So you have this continent, or this country, excuse me, where people do have a darker skin shade than other people, and the top selling product is skin lightening. So it is not a problem in just the United States. It's certainly not a problem just in the southern United States. This is a global problem. And we need companies to recognize that they need to push back for the good of us all. So we as teacher educators, especially if we're in early childhood, need to recognize that we can make the crucial difference now while the children are young by reading. There's another book behind me, Black Boys Can Cry. There's another book similar to it, Good Enough, where we have the power right now to recognize, yes, this is a problem, and we should never put down any country. We need to be very careful with young children to always hold people up and show them the value. But this is a problem that we have in the United States. It's worldwide. And we have to start saying, what can we do? What can we do with 3-year-olds? So I always like to think that we have to normalize and celebrate. So normalize with infants would be to have a library in your classroom full of books that feature people who are African American for my talk, and in others they might want to feature other communities, the Latinx community, Asian community, whatever community is important to feature, so that children just recognize this as normal, that this community is the same as any other community in the sense of normalization, and then comes celebration. So we need to go out of our way to recognize what communities are being minoritized And how can we celebrate the greatness of those communities? So children who are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in preschool and kindergarten are getting these messages. So they, as future doctors and lawyers and legislators, or whatever they choose to be in life, will already have these messages.
That was a great response. Thank you so much. It's really a collective global responsibility now. We cannot just hide in the fact that, hey, we're not one of those people who are in that community, so we cannot do that. I think I want to really connect with this message to my next question, which is about being an ally. To me, it's particularly amazing and a good thing to celebrate that you, as a Jewish educator, you identify yourself as a Jewish educator, being highly conscious and highly supportive of Black communities and resisting the anti-Blackness and racism with your work. How do you explain the importance of being an ally when you're not part of that community? And how should we do that work? Because I feel like sometimes social justice movements fail when people only chant for their own backyard or their own neighborhoods and do not see those occurring in other contexts until it happens to you. And that's something that is of a global importance. We see it everywhere in other countries where smaller communities are marginalized, but some of these communities do not realize it until it comes to them. So how do you explain the work?
Oh, thank you so much. What a great question. So, I think of two things from my own Jewish heritage. One is a directive in the Jewish teachings in the 5 books of Moses, where it says, Tzedek, tzedek tirdov, justice, justice thou shalt pursue. So I think a foundational piece of Judaism, of being Jewish, is to pursue justice. And that can not only be for your own community. In a sense, one can look at the 5 books of Moses, what some call the Old Testament, although that's not the name I would choose. Look there and see that the most repeated directive in those 5 books are to show kindness and compassion to the stranger. That is what is the most repeated directive or commandment, so to say. So I think that hinges on, is a foundational part of Judaism, where we are being directed to be allies or co-conspirators. And also in my own life, so my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. So my grandmother came over in 1940, so pretty late. She escaped from Austria. She was 8 months pregnant with my father, so he was born just a short time after coming here. And I recognized that part of the way that she was able to escape, and a few months later her husband was able to escape Nazi Germany, was because others, who, Jewish and non-Jewish people, helped with that effort. So while I find that the general message of Judaism is to do this, I also have family historical background stemming from the atrocities of the Holocaust, but also seeing the righteousness of people during the Holocaust, that makes me recognize, as a Jewish person, I am part of a privileged minority here in the United States. And of course, there is anti-Semitism, and I have a branch of my work is on anti-Semitism. But for the most part, Jewish people are in a wonderful position in the United States. And therefore, I am called upon, yes, to help Jewish people, but also to help others. And I've had some terrific African-American mentors, Dr. Gloria Botti, who is the author of the book Where the Chapter Is, Dr. Nathaniel Bryan, Dr. Kamanya Winter-Hoyt, Dr. Eliza Braden, and also white colleagues like Dr. Susie Long, who have mentored me and helped me gain this perception and be a good co-conspirator.
That's so nice. And it's a very nice transition into my next question, which is about you personally. Who were the people who inspired you when you were a young person? Because we all know that that work and the consciousness about inequalities and social justice issues starts as very young usually. Who inspired you? You mentioned about your own Holocaust survival story within your family. What else?
Sure. Well, thank you so much. So, I I was raised by educators. So my dad was a principal, my mother a kindergarten teacher, and my two sisters ended up running small schools of their own. So there was education in our home from the very beginning. And I think part of education and lives of teachers and educators is to naturally help others. Now, growing up in a very white neighborhood, I can say that anti-racism was part of my home. But as I advanced through school, which honestly was with all white children, or almost all white children, until perhaps university. So I was lucky in that I was building a consciousness of how to counter anti Semitism, how to counter problems, how to speak to children. We had a situation in the school that I was head of where a child transitioned in third grade from perhaps being a boy to recognizing as a girl. And I had to look at that issue early in my career and say, well, how can I advocate for that person? So I don't know if I have one moment in early childhood that particularly did it, but I think it was growing up in the home of a Holocaust survivor. And while that was not spoken about when I was young, it was absolutely not spoken about. We children knew there was something. There was something horrible that had happened, although we didn't know what it was. So as I grew and that became clearer, as I worked in a school and had issues that I was able to help out, and then as I entered my doctoral program and were mentored by such wonderful people, all of that came together and led me to where I am today, which is enabling me to be an ally and co-conspirator and work with very young children, college students, and adults. So I really feel blessed that I'm able to be part of this work.
A great insight. Thank you, Meir. We probably have about 2 questions left before we wrap up, but I want to get in a little bit more in deeper in terms of the challenges along the way. How did you respond, if you can think of a couple challenges you encountered along the way? Because not everyone thinks this way, right? Like, so in your interactions with particularly perhaps people within your own communities or others who are not so inclined or so convinced about the importance of this work, how did you work with them?
Sure. So thank you. So I think I could break that up into two different groups. One is a group of people who wanted to do the work, but would have challenges, which I myself experienced, of like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if by accident, while I'm trying to be anti-racist, I make a mistake in saying something racist? And that is part of the journey. It's not easy, nor should it be. So I do have challenges like that where I just didn't have the knowledge to do it, although I knew I wanted to. I was worried I'd make a mistake. I was thinking, who am I as a white middle class person to advocate for a different group of people? So I had a lot of doubts, and I hear these echoed in both college students, in-service teachers, so that are already in schools, have these same concerns that they won't do it right, that they'll cause harm, or as I mentioned earlier, that aren't the children too young? They're so innocent. So I had a lot of that pushback internally and externally. And then there were the challenges of self-courage. I just needed to be bolder. I would question myself, well, there's one African American student in the class. What if I somehow embarrass that person? Or what if I, once again, I guess, get it wrong? So there are these internal, external hurdles that can be barriers. But I kept on asking myself, as Dr. Gloria Boutte writes in this book, that we all have to answer, and how are the children? we need to answer the question, how are the children? And we need to be able to answer, all the children are well. So with that motto in my mind, I approach every day asking, is today a day where I'm going to be able to say, and because of something I did, that all the children are at least on the way to being well? So I just didn't let the barriers stop me. I tried to make them bridges through internal work, through learning with scholars, so that I could ask that and answer that very important question.
That is so great. Thank you, Meir. I'm going to ask you in conclusion, perhaps to give you a little bit time to think about what resources would you recommend to educators and parents as they're starting? It could be both children's literature, but also other more practical resources. Obviously, we can also add them in the information section of our video. But in conclusion, I wanted to also ask a follow-up question to what you just said. How did this work transform you as a person? Because when people think about anti-racist work, the first thing that might come to mind is there will be a lot of conflicts, there will be a lot of barriers. It won't be easy. It won't even be easy to bring it up with children, let alone with adults. But as you perfectly mentioned, there is this transformative nature of the work that comes through intentional thinking and reflection and working on your own first. So may I ask how this work transformed you? So how are you different now as compared to the past?
Well, thank you. I honestly believe that this work has made me a better human being. It's made me a better father to my 4 children, a better grandfather to my wonderful granddaughter, a better husband, and certainly a better educator. So I think that, as Piaget would describe, that we all would enter disequilibrium. When we're about to learn something new, it might not feel comfortable, and then we pass to the other side, and we have this feeling of peace that we've moved to a new plane of understanding. So each time the anti-racist work is difficult, I remind myself that that is the moment of learning. And yes, it's feeling difficult, but I'm going to come out as a better person. And it has been true to me. And once again, I don't do the work for any benefit for myself. It's to make this world a better place for children. But I have found that it has made me a better person, perhaps even a better rabbi, because I am a Jewish rabbi, a minister. So it has given me a lens to see the world that I was just blind to before. So I truly believe in that woke expression, because it felt like I wasn't fully awake, fully seeing the world, fully interacting with the world as it is. And this has made me a better person, a better Jewish person. So I truly feel blessed on that. And as far as resources, so of course I would suggest the book we're discussing, We Be Loving Black Children by Dr. Gloria Boutte, and the other authors you can see at the bottom. Other books that come to mind are behind me, so you'll excuse me for a second. I'll reach behind. But if we're looking for one or two in particular, well, I don't want to keep my back to the camera, but this is the book is Anti-Racist, a very quick read. I would suggest Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, full of wisdom. There is another book here. That one's a bit... So You Want to Talk About Race is another great one. And there are websites. Woke Kindergarten is a nice website. And I would be happy to supply others. I'm not good with things right off the top of my head, but those are some examples. And then there's some beautiful children's books to read. If you're particularly looking to open up conversations about anti-racism with young children, so I would suggest the book I showed earlier, Daddy, There's a Noise Outside. Another one, which is a little tougher, talking about police violence, would be Mama, Did You Hear the News? Those two get right to the heart of this issue. They are picture books, so written for 8, 9, 10-year-olds, or even younger. So those are some publications that could begin, and I'd be happy to send you a book list because I've created a book list of all the read alouds that I have behind me, and there's quite a number of them. So I could send you that book list to share with people who might see this podcast.
This will be such an excellent resource, and we would definitely add it to our information section on our video. But Meir, I'm just amazed, and I feel so full and really inspired by your journey. And thank you so much for opening that up for us, and both to speak about the issues, both in a professional way, technical way, but also in a more personal way, where you told us more about your life and your inspirations. I really feel like this was a big treat for us. Thank you so much for joining the conversation, Meir. We would love to have our viewers connect to your work. And just this is for our viewers. If you are interested in Dr. Muller's work, please go ahead and connect with him on, through hopefully the information that he will provide, and perhaps social media, at least his website, and his wonderful, like practical, community contexts, the Jewish school that he does a lot of his work. And obviously, please purchase the book so that the publishers see that there's value in publishing anti-racist work, especially in the world of young children and their educators. So, Meir, again, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.